Everyone saw her as merely a cleaner, but 50 powerful military dogs sensed something special about her long before any person did. A furious roar from 50 trained canines tore through the quiet morning at the Naval Special Warfare Canine Training Grounds. Their bark swelled and faded, like ocean waves pounding against metal and stone. This aggressive symphony had broken in stronger spirits than the small woman standing at the main entrance. Chief Petty Officer Derek Vance grabbed a push broom from the supply cart and threw it at the ground. The wooden handle cracked against the concrete, skidding to a halt mere inches from her worn sneakers. "Pick it up." The woman, Ivory Lawson, according to the slim application folder tucked under his arm, didn't even flinch. She stood maybe 5 feet 3 inches, perhaps 115 pounds, soaking wet. Her faded gray jacket hung loosely on her narrow shoulders. Brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, eyes cast downward as if she'd spent her life avoiding conflict. Derek stepped forward, his combat boots grinding the broom handle into the pavement. Behind him, Lieutenant Amber Nash uncrossed her arms just long enough to check her manicure. Petty Officer First Class Caleb Reeves let out a low whistle that echoed across the training yard. The entire K9 team, 15 handlers strong, had gathered to watch their Monday morning show. "I asked you a question." Derek's shadow fell across her face. "You know what your job is here." Ivory nodded once, still silent. "Cleaning kennels." He spoke each word slowly, as if she might be hard of hearing. 50 dogs, every single day. You get what that means? Another small nod. Amber Nash strolled closer, her lieutenant's badges gleaming in the Virginia Beach sun. "Derek, I don't think she speaks English. Maybe we need a translator." She tilted her head, inspecting Ivory like something bothersome stuck to her shoe. "Where exactly did HR dig this one up?" "Civilian contractor pool," Derek replied without taking his eyes off the new hire. "Bottom of the barrel apparent." Laughter rippled through the assembled handlers. Petty Officer Second Class Mason Briggs pulled out his phone, aiming for a better photo of the unfolding humiliation. Ivory bent down and picked up the broom. "Good girl." Derek's lip curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Now you'll start with Alpha Block. That's where we keep our most enthusiastic residents." He gestured toward a row of fortified kennels where Belgian Malinois paced behind steel mesh, their amber eyes tracking every movement. "Oh, and a friendly warning. The last janitor lost 2 fingers to Rex. He's the big one at the end. Black muzzle. Likes to play." Ivory's gaze flickered toward Alpha Block for a split second. Then she tightened her grip on the broom handle and started walking. No complaint, no questions, no trace of fear in her eyes that anyone could spot. Derek exchanged a look with Amber. $20 says she doesn't last till lunch. "I give her an hour," Caleb called out. "Rex hates everybody." Master Sergeant Silas Turner stood apart from the group, leaning against the equipment shed with his arms folded. At 53 he'd handled military working dogs longer than most of these young pups had been alive. His seasoned face showed nothing as he watched the small woman walk toward Alpha Block. But something in his posture changed, something that looked almost like focused attention. The barking grew louder as Ivory neared the first kennel. A massive German shepherd threw itself against the chain link, foam gathering at the corners of its mouth. The noise was deafening, a wall of sound designed to break anyone's spirit. Ivory kept walking, second kennel, third, fourth, each dog more aggressive than the last, each barrier shaking under the force of powerful bodies and sharp teeth. Then she reached Rex. The Belgian Malinois was everything Derek had promised and more. 85 pounds of muscle and meanness, descended from a line tracing back to the first DEVGRU combat dogs. His record included 3 handler injuries, 2 escape attempts, and 1 incident that remained classified at levels most people didn't even know existed. Rex launched himself at the kennel door the moment Ivory's shadow crossed his space. His bark was different from the others, deeper, more guttural, a sound that spoke of barely held violence. And then it stopped. Rex's front paws hit the ground, his huge head tilted to one side. The constant growl died in his throat, replaced by something no one at the facility had ever seen: silence. The dog sat down, ears flat against his head. His tail, a tail that had never wagged for anyone in 4 years of service, began a slow, unsure sweep across the concrete floor. Ivory paused just for a second. Then she continued toward the supply closet at the end of the row, leaving Rex staring after her with an expression that could only be called recognition. "What the?" Derek's voice trailed off. Amber stepped closer to the kennel, her heels clicking against the pavement. Rex immediately lunged at the barrier, teeth bared, his familiar murderous intent fully back. She stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance. "Must be wearing some kind of pheromone spray," Caleb suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe Rex is finally going soft." Silas Turner said nothing, but his eyes hadn't left Ivory since she'd picked up that broom, and the crease between his eyebrows had deepened into something nearing true curiosity. The morning moved slowly in a fog of bleach and animal waste. Ivory worked through Alpha Block with steady precision, cleaning each kennel without issue, while the handlers watched from a safe distance. Every dog she approached fell silent. Every snarl died before it fully formed. It was as if she carried some invisible shield that the animals could sense, but the humans couldn't grasp. Mason Briggs got bored around 9 a.m. He'd been assigned to watch the new janitor, on Derek's orders. But watching someone shovel waste wasn't exactly exciting. When Ivory entered the last kennel in Alpha Block to clean around the water bowl, Mason saw his chance. The lock clicked shut with a satisfying metallic snap. He walked away whistling, phone already in hand to text the good news to the group chat. Inside the kennel, Ivory stood up straight. The dog in this space was named Titan, a German shepherd with a bite force measured at 430 pounds per square inch, and a temper that had led to his removal from active duty. He was, according to every file, impossible to retrain. Titan rose from his corner, fur bristling, lips pulling back to show teeth that could crush bone like twigs. Ivory put down her brush. She turned to face him, her movements slow and careful. No fear showed on her face. No panic quickened her breath. She simply looked at the dog the way one might greet an old friend after years apart. Titan came closer. One step, two. His growl filled the enclosed space like thunder. Ivory didn't back away, didn't speak. She lowered herself into a crouch, making herself smaller, less threatening. Her eyes met Titan's directly. A challenge in dog terms, a declaration. The German shepherd lunged and stopped. His nose was inches from her throat, when something in his brain overrode every learned instinct. The growl faded. The tension left his massive body. Titan whimpered once, a sound of confusion and something deeper, then sank to his belly and laid his head across Ivory's knee. 10 feet away, hidden behind an equipment rack, Fern Cooper watched with her hand pressed over her mouth. The veterinary technician had been on her way to give Titan his weekly supplements, when she'd seen Mason Briggs locking the kennel door with someone still inside. By the time she'd found the emergency keys, she expected to find a tragedy. Instead, she found a miracle. "How did—" Fern's voice was barely a whisper. "He's never let anyone touch him. Not in 3 years." Ivory looked up, her expression unchanged. "He's not angry. He's scared. There's a difference." She rose smoothly to her feet, gave Titan a quick scratch behind the ear, and gathered her cleaning supplies. The dog watched her go with intelligent amber eyes, tail thumping against the concrete in a rhythm that matched something ancient and natural. Fern fumbled with the kennel door. "I should report what happened. Mason can't just—" "Please don't." The 2 words stopped Fern in the middle of her sentence, not because of their loudness. Ivory had spoken so softly the sounds barely carried, but because of what lay beneath them, a tiredness that had nothing to do with physical work. A resignation that spoke of battles fought in places far beyond this training facility. "I'm just here to do a job," Ivory continued, already walking toward the next block. "Nothing more." Fern watched her go, questions growing with every step the stranger took. Questions she suspected wouldn't have easy answer. Commander Raymond Hayes received the morning's incident report at 11:32 a.m. He read it twice, then called Derek Vance to his office, with a single urgent message: "Get up here now." The commander's office was on the 2nd floor of the administration building, overlooking the main training yard where handlers were guiding their dogs through obstacle courses. Hayes stood at the window with his back to the door when Derek entered. "Explain to me," Hayes said without turning around, "why we have a civilian contractor with no animal handling experience, no security clearance beyond basic, and no clear qualifications being locked in kennels with dogs flagged for behavioral rehabilitation." Derek's jaw tightened. "Sir, I wasn't aware. You weren't aware that Petty Officer Briggs decided to turn a woman's first day of work into some kind of hazing ritual. Hayes finally turned, his gray eyes cold enough to freeze glass. Or you weren't aware that I would find out. Sir, the kennel incident was a liability, a potential lawsuit, and most importantly, a distraction from the real work this facility is supposed to be doing. Hayes moved to his desk, picking up a thin folder. Ivory Lawson applied through the standard civilian contractor pool. References checked out. Former cleaning jobs. Nothing special. HR approved her 3 days ago. Sir, with respect, there's something off about her. The dogs, what about them? Derek hesitated. Putting his suspicions into words felt foolish, like admitting he believed in ghosts. They respond to her, all of them, even Rex, even Titan. It's not natural. Hayes studied the folder in his hands. Have you thought that she simply has experience with animals that wasn't on her application? I've thought of many things, sir. Consider this one instead. Hayes closed the folder with a snap. She has a 1-week trial period. If she causes problems, we end the contract. If she doesn't, we leave her alone and focus on the Pentagon evaluation coming up. Are we clear? Crystals, sir. Derek left the commander's office with tight shoulders and a racing mind. Something about that woman didn't add up. The way she moved, the way she carried herself, the complete absence of fear when any sane person would have been terrified. He'd seen that kind of calm before in operators returning from missions they couldn't speak about, in veterans who'd left parts of themselves in places not on any map. But that was impossible. She was a janitor, a nobody, wasn't she? Before we go on, I want to thank everyone watching. Right now 73% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying this tale and want more military content like this, take 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow, and you won't miss new videos. Now let's get back to Ivory and those 50 military dogs who seem to know something no one else does. The second day began gray and cold, a weather front moving in from the Atlantic that turned the training yard into a windy, miserable place. Ivory arrived at 6 a.m., before any handlers had finished their first cup of coffee. She was halfway through Bravo Block when she found the injured dog. Kaiser was a 3-year-old Belgian Malinois with a service record that included 2 overseas deployments and a reputation for perfect aggression. He was also currently favoring his right front leg, a trickle of blood staining the concrete beneath his paw. Ivory put down her mop, knelt beside the kennel door. Kaiser watched her with cautious eyes, that natural dog suspicion fighting with something else, something that told him this human was different. Easy, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Let me see. The kennel door wasn't locked during cleaning hours. Ivory pushed it open slowly, giving Kaiser every chance to object. Instead, the dog limped forward and presented his injured paw like a patient at a doctor's office. The wound was a deep cut, probably from catching his foot on the sharp edge of the fence during training. Left untreated, it would get infected within days. Ivory examined it with fingers that moved with practiced precision, probing the edges of the cut while Kaiser whimpered softly. From her jacket pocket she pulled out a small first aid kit. Standard civilian issue, nothing special, but the way she cleaned the wound, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, and wrapped the sterile gauze around Kaiser's paw was anything but standard. Her hands worked with the ingrained memory of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Her method was textbook military field dressing, the kind taught in special operations medical courses that took months to complete. Fern Cooper arrived with Kaiser's morning supplements and found the scene. Small woman, large dog. Perfect bandage that would have made any combat medic proud. Where did you learn to do that? The question escaped before Fern could stop it. Ivory didn't look up from securing the last strip of tape. YouTube. That's not a YouTube bandage. Must have been a good video. Ivory rose, gathered her supplies and moved toward the next kennel. His wound should be checked by a vet. It's deep but clean. Fern stared at the bandage, at Kaiser, who had already settled into a comfortable position, with his injured leg extended, more relaxed than she'd ever seen it, at the retreating figure of a woman who supposedly knew nothing about animal care. Wait, Fern called out. At least tell me your name, your real name. Ivory paused at the kennel door. For a moment something flickered across her face, perhaps a shadow of a smile, or just a trick of the gray morning light. Ivory works fine, She was gone before Fern could ask another question. The training exercise that afternoon was supposed to be routine handler evaluation drills, held every quarter to ensure dogs and their partners stayed at peak readiness. Lieutenant Amber Nash was in charge, meaning everything had to run on time and look impressive for the report she'd be filing. The scenario was simple: a fake hostile encounter in the urban warfare setup that took up the facility's eastern area. Two-story buildings made of plywood and concrete. Street layouts designed to look like Middle Eastern architecture. Target dummies wired to pop up and fall down on command. Caleb Reeves was leading with Shadow, a German Shepherd he'd handled for 18 months. Their job was to clear the first building, find the hostage dummy on the second floor, and signal all clear. Standard stuff for any experienced K9 team. What no one expected was the pyrotechnic malfunction. The flashbang simulators were supposed to produce light and noise without actual explosive force training aids. Nothing more. But somewhere in the maintenance chain, someone had loaded a device with the wrong charge. When it detonated 6 feet from Caleb's position, the shockwave sent him sprawling backward, confused and temporarily deafened. Shadow's training barely held. The dog froze in place, waiting for commands that weren't coming from his handler's ringing ears. What happened next would be talked about for weeks. Ivory had been cleaning windows on the administration building's second floor. She had a clear view of the training setup. When the explosion ripped through the morning air, she didn't hesitate. By the time anyone else had processed what was happening, she was already moving. Not running, that would have been too obvious, but gliding through the facility with a speed that seemed impossible for someone her size. She reached the setup's edge in under 30 seconds, slipping past the safety barriers while the safety officers were still fumbling for their radios. Inside the building, Caleb was trying to stand. Blood trickled from his left ear. His balance was gone. His inner ear scrambled by the pressure wave. Shadow whimpered and circled, torn between protecting his handler and completing the mission drilled into his training. Ivory appeared in the doorway like smoke. "Don't move," she said, her voice cutting through the ringing in Caleb's ears with surprising clarity. "You're concussed. Moving will make it worse." How did you? Your dog is confused. He needs a handler command or he'll go into protect mode." She crouched beside Caleb, her fingers checking his pulse, pupils. How responsive he was. "Give him the stand-down signal." Caleb's hand moved almost without thought, forming the gesture he had practiced thousands of times. Shadow immediately dropped into a sitting position, tongue hanging out, the worry leaving his posture. "Good." Ivory rose. "Medical team will be here in 90 seconds. You're going to be fine." She was gone before he could ask her name, before he could ask how a cleaning lady knew anything about concussion assessment or dog command protocols, before he could process the fact that her hands during those brief moments of examination had moved with the skill of someone who'd treated battle injuries in the field. Caleb replayed the moment in his mind as the medics loaded him onto a stretcher. The way she'd spoken, the certainty in her eyes, the complete lack of panic when any civilian should have been running from explosions, not toward them. He didn't share his suspicions with anyone. Not yet, but when they released him from medical observation with a clean bill of health, the first thing he did was find Derek Vance. "We need to talk," Caleb said about the janitor. Evening fell over the facility like a heavy blanket, the kind of darkness that seemed to soak up sound. Most handlers had gone home or to the barracks. The dogs had been fed and settled. Only the security patrols moved through the compound, their footsteps echoing off concrete and steel. Ivory was cleaning the main training building when Mason Briggs found her. "Hey." He blocked the doorway, arms crossed, that smirk from the first morning back in full force. "Heard you played hero today, running into explosions, playing doctor with Reeves." She continued mopping. "I was nearby. Anyone would have helped." "See, that's the thing." Mason stepped closer. "Not just anyone would have known what to do. Not just anyone would have moved like you did." The mop stopped its steady motion. Ivory looked up, and for the first time, Mason saw something in her eyes that made his confidence waver. Something old and tired and entirely out of patience. "What do you want, petty officer? I want to know who you really are." "I'm the cleaning lady. You made that very clear yesterday when you locked me in with Titan." Mason's jaw tightened. "That was just hazing." "I know," she resumed, mopping. "Shouldn't you be getting ready for the evaluation tomorrow? I understand the Pentagon team is quite particular about protocol." How did she know about the Pentagon evaluation? This information hadn't been shared with civilian contractors. Mason's eyes narrowed, but before he could push further, the lights flickered. A siren pierced the night. The compound alarm, 3 short blasts followed by 1 long, echoed off every building. Perimeter breach, eastern fence line. Mason's training kicked in automatically. He sprinted for the armory. Ivory forgotten in the sudden rush of boots pounding and dogs barking and radios crackling with urgent commands. Within minutes, the facility turned into a controlled storm of activity. Handlers retrieved their dogs. Security teams deployed to the breach point. Floodlights blazed to life, turning night into harsh, artificial day. Commander Hayes coordinated from the operations center, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through every channel. "I want eyes on the eastern perimeter. Now." "Who triggered the sensor?" The answer came back confused, contradictory. "Motion detected, but no visual confirmation. Thermal cameras showed nothing." The breach had either been a mistake or something able to move without leaving a heat signature. While the security team searched the fence line, no one noticed Ivory Lawson standing alone at the edge of Alpha Block. Her eyes tracked the darkness beyond the floodlights. Her posture subtly changed into something that didn't look like a cleaning lady at all. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small object, a challenge coin worn smooth by years of handling. The design was impossible to see in the darkness, but her thumb traced its outline like a prayer. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the coin vanished back into her pocket. Ivory retrieved her mop and bucket and walked toward the supply closet. Just another unnoticed worker, while warriors responded to threats she wasn't supposed to understand. The Eastern Perimeter incident was called a sensor malfunction by morning, but the dogs knew better. Every dog in Alpha Block had gone silent during those 37 minutes. Not the aggressive silence of a hunt, but the alert stillness of recognition, as if they were waiting, watching, protecting something no human had thought to identify. Day 3 brought clouds low enough to touch, and with them came Lieutenant Amber Nash's renewed plan to put the janitor in her place. "Vance tells me you have experience with animal handling," Amber announced, stopping Ivory on her way to the supply closet. 2 junior handlers stood beside the lieutenant, their faces showing equal parts curiosity and anticipation. "Funny thing to leave off your application." Ivory kept her eyes down. "I've had pets. Nothing professional." "Pets?" Amber laughed, a sharp sound without warning. "Is that what you call what happened with Kaiser's bandage? Or the way you handled Shadow's handler during the explosion yesterday?" "I was trying to help." "Help?" The word dripped with scorn. "You're a cleaning contractor, Lawson. Your job is to clean. Leave the heroics to people who know what they're doing." Ivory nodded, the movement small and obedient. Anyone watching would have seen a woman accepting her place. Silas Turner, watching from the shadow of the equipment shed, saw something else entirely. He saw the slight shift in her stance when Amber stepped too close. The way her weight moved to the balls of her feet, the absolute stillness that spoke of hidden power, ready to be unleashed. He'd seen that posture before, in the mirror 30 years ago, before his first deployment, before he'd learned what it meant to carry invisible burdens no civilian could understand. The training demonstration that afternoon was meant to show off the facility's best teams for visiting congressional staff. Derek Vance had been preparing for weeks, working with public affairs to get the most positive coverage. The demonstration began with basic obedience drills, dogs responding to voice and hand signals with mechanical accuracy. Then came the impressive stuff: obstacle courses, protection scenarios, and finally the main event, a simulated building assault that would show the value of military working dogs in modern combat operations. The congressional staffers sat in a covered viewing stand, sipping coffee and nodding at the right moments while their assistants took notes. Commander Hayes stood nearby, offering commentary with the practiced pace of someone who'd briefed politicians before. Everything was going as planned until Caleb Reeves brought out Shadow for the detection demonstration. The scenario required Shadow to find a hidden explosive device, actually a training aid scented with specific compounds inside a mock building interior. Standard stuff, rehearsed many times. Shadow would find the target, alert his handler, and everyone would applaud the marvel of dog detection. Shadow found the target in under 40 seconds, but instead of alerting to Caleb, the dog turned his head toward a figure standing at the back of the crowd. The German shepherd whimpered once, then broke from his handler's control and trotted directly toward the cleaning lady, who had somehow ended up near a high-profile demonstration. Shadow. Heel. Caleb's command cut through the stunned silence. The dog ignored him. Shadow stopped in front of Ivory and sat. His tail wagged. His eyes never left her face. And then, with the careful precision of a dog trained to detect specific chemical signatures, he pressed his nose against her jacket pocket. The pocket where she'd hidden the challenge coin the night before. The pocket that apparently carried traces of something Shadow's advanced nose could identify. Amber Nash recovered first. Well, this is embarrassing. Apparently our detection dog has developed an attraction to cleaning products. Scattered, awkward laughter from the congressional staffer. Caleb hurried forward to retrieve Shadow, his face red with shame. Commander Hayes stepped in with a smooth redirection, launching into an explanation of how sensitive dogs' noses could be to unfamiliar smells. But Silas Turner wasn't looking at the politicians, or the embarrassed handler, or even the dog. He was watching Ivory's hand. Just for a moment. So brief it could have been imagination. Her fingers had pressed against that jacket pocket. A protective gesture. A reef. What was she hiding in there that a military detection dog would alert to? More importantly, why did she have it in the first place? The fallout from the Shadow incident was contained but had consequence. Derek Vance pulled Ivory aside after the congressional delegation left, his voice low and threatening. "I don't know what game you're playing," he said, "but it ends now. I'm not playing any. The dogs follow you around like lost puppies. You appear from nowhere during explosions. Detection dogs alert on you during demonstrations." His finger jabbed toward her chest, stopping just short of touching. "You're going to tell me the truth or I'm going to have security escort you off this facility permanently." Ivory met his eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, something shifted between them. Derek had spent his career reading people, body language, tiny expressions, the 1,000 small signs that separated threats from friends, predators from prey. What he saw in Ivory's gaze didn't fit any category he knew. Not fear, not defiance, not even the desperate planning of someone caught in a lie. What he saw was patience, the endless, unwavering patience of someone who had faced worse enemies than a swaggering petty officer, and emerged whole. "I'm here to clean kennels," Ivory said quietly. "That's all I'm willing to discuss." She walked away before he could respond, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Derek let her go. That night he started making calls. Chief Warrant Officer Ezra Dalton was the facility's intelligence liaison, responsible for background checks and personnel security. When Derek asked for a deep dive on Ivory Lawson, Ezra raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. The first search returned exactly what the application had promised. Previous employment at commercial cleaning services, a home address in Norfolk, unremarkable credit history, valid social security number, tax records in order. Then Ezra tried to access the federal database. "That's strange." He frowned at his monitor, fingers dancing across the keyboard. "What?" Derek leaned closer. "Her record. It's locked." Ezra typed in another sequence. "Another rejection. Hold on. Let me try a different approach." More typing. More access code. The screen flickered twice, then showed a message neither man had ever seen before. "Access denied. Classified level 5. Further inquiries will be logged and reported. Contact DIA Special Operations Division." Ezra sat back slowly. "Level 5. That's not supposed to be possible for a civilian." "What does it mean?" "It means her real file exists somewhere I can't reach. It means someone with a lot of stars on their shoulders decided her information was too sensitive for regular military databases." Ezra looked up at Derek, his expression troubled. "It means either she's a spy, or she's the exact opposite of a spy. You're going to have to be more specific." "I'm saying that level 5 classification is for active special operations personnel and their covers. Deep cover. The kind of people who don't exist on paper because their existence would put national security at risk." Derek stared at the flashing denial message on the screen. His mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. "A janitor," he said finally, his voice hollow. "We've been harassing a janitor for 3 days. Maybe." Ezra's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Or maybe we've been harassing someone who chose to become a janitor. Big difference." The question was why. Why would anyone with level 5 clearance, with access to resources and positions most people only read about in novels, choose to scrub kennels at a canine training facility? Unless this facility had something she wanted. Unless 50 military working dogs weren't just animals to her. Unless they were something else entirely. Day 4 arrived with Commander Hayes receiving a phone call that changed everything. Ezra Dalton's inquiries had triggered automatic alerts up the chain of command. By 8 a.m., Hayes was on a secure line with someone at the Pentagon who spoke in the short, sharp words of classified briefings. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, Hayes sat still at his desk for a long time, staring at the training yard below his window, at the woman in the faded gray jacket, pushing a cleaning cart toward Alpha Block like she had every day that week. He reached for his phone and dialed Derek Vance's extension. "The investigation into Lawson stops now," he said without preamble. "Sir, we found something. Her records are. I know what her records are, and I know what happens to people who keep digging into things they're not supposed to find." Hayes paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Leave her alone, Chief. Whatever she's doing here, it's above our pay grade. With respect, sir, I have a responsibility to this facility. Your responsibility is to prepare for tomorrow's Pentagon evaluation. Nothing else. Am I clear?" The line went dead before Derek could argue. He stood in his office, phone still pressed to his ear, confusion and frustration battling on his face. Behind him, through the window, Ivory Lawson had stopped walking. She was kneeling beside Rex's kennel, one hand pressed flat against the chain-link fence. The famous Belgian Malinois was pressed against the barrier from the inside, his nose touching her palm through the metal mesh. Neither of them moved. From a distance, it looked almost like a reunion, like a homecoming. We're at the halfway point of this story, and I have to say, the mystery is just getting started. But before we continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me who you think Ivory really is. I read every single comment, and your theories might just inspire the next story. Also, if you're enjoying this video, hit that like button to let me know, and it helps more people discover these military stories. Now let's get back to the truth. Everyone at this facility is about to discover. The annual Pentagon evaluation arrived with all the subtlety of a military parade. 3 black SUVs pulled through the main gate at 9 a.m. sharp, dropping off a delegation that included 2 colonels, a naval captain, a civilian analyst, and to everyone's surprise, a 3-star admiral, whose presence had not been announced beforehand. Admiral Solomon Blake stepped onto the pavement with the calm confidence of a man who'd spent 4 decades rising through the ranks of naval special warfare. His chest bore enough ribbons to cover a small room. His eyes, pale blue and intense, swept across the assembled facility staff like targeting lasers. "Quite a reception," he remarked to Commander Hayes. "I don't remember asking for a parade." "Sir, we weren't expecting." "That's the point, Commander." The Admiral's attention had already moved on, cataloging details, filing observations. "I prefer to see things as they actually are, not as they're presented." Gunnery Sergeant Logan Pierce emerged from the 3rd SUV, a Marine Corps liaison, whose presence suggested this evaluation carried weight beyond a routine inspection. He carried a tablet and an expression that showed he'd rather be anywhere else. The morning's planned demonstrations went off with the precision of a Swiss watch. Obstacle courses cleared, detection scenarios completed, basic obedience flawlessly executed. Commander Hayes narrated from the viewing stand, while his handlers performed with the desperation of soldiers, who knew their careers depended on every detail. It was during the attack dog demonstration that everything began to fall apart. Derek Vance was coordinating the exercise, a simulated hostile engagement in which Rex would chase and hold a volunteer, wearing protective gear. The scenario had been practiced endlessly, every variable considered, every emergency planned for, every emergency except the one that actually happened. The volunteer was a young ensign named Peters, chosen because he could run fast and knew how to fall safely when 85 pounds of Belgian Malinois slammed into his back. He took his position at the far end of the training yard, raised his padded arm as the target, and waited for the signal. Derek released Rex with the attack command. The dog launched like a missile, covering ground with terrifying speed. Peters braced himself, leaning forward, ready to absorb the impact. Then Rex veered, not toward Peters, not toward the designated target at all. The Belgian Malinois changed direction mid-stride, his powerful legs churning as he sped toward the spectator area, toward the cleaning lady, standing at the edge of the crowd with her mop and bucket. "Rex, hi. IR. Stop." Derek's commands bounced off the dog like rain off armor. Rex had never disobeyed a direct order in 4 years of service. Had never stopped chasing a target once locked on. Had never shown the slightest change from his programming until now. The dog reached Ivory at full speed, and did something that made every handler present question their sanity. He stopped, sat, pressed his massive head against her leg, and whimpered. The sound that came from Rex was nothing like the aggressive vocalization they had all heard 1,000 times. This was the whimper of a child finding a lost parent, the cry of recognition that went beyond training, conditioning, and 4 years of carefully built aggression. Admiral Blake rose from his chair. His expression had shifted from polite boredom to something much more intense. "Commander Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent training yard. "Who is that woman?" Hayes opened his mouth to respond, but Derek Vance was already moving. The shame of having his dog malfunction during a Pentagon evaluation had turned into fury. He crossed the distance to Ivory in seconds, grabbed her shoulder, and spun her around to face him. "What did you do to my dog?" "Nothing. Don't give me that." His grip tightened. First Titan, then Kaiser, then Shadow. "Now, every dog at this facility responds to you like you're some kind of Chief Vance." Admiral Blake's voice cracked like a whip. "Release that woman immediately." Derek's hand dropped without thought. He turned to face the Admiral, confusion battling with the instinct to obey that had been drilled into him since basic training. Blake descended from the viewing stand, his movements deliberate. The other members of the Pentagon delegation remained seated, sensing they were witnessing something beyond their clearance level. "Your name," the Admiral said, stopping 3 feet from Ivory. "Your full name." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond the Admiral's shoulder, a patch on Gunnery Sergeant Pierce's uniform, a specific badge that apparently meant something to her. "My name is Ivory Lawson," she said finally. "I'm a cleaning contractor." "You're lying." The words hung in the air like smoke. No one breathed. Even Rex had gone completely still, his dark eyes moving between the two humans as if watching a tennis match played at a frequency only he could perceive. Admiral Blake studied her face for a long moment. Then his attention dropped to her hands, to the small scars that marked her fingers like a map of old injuries, to the calluses that shouldn't exist on someone who pushed mops for a living. "Your hands," he said quietly. "Those are handlers' hands. Professional grade. Years of work with bite suits and combat harnesses." His gaze rose to meet hers. "You're K9, aren't you? Or you were." Ivory said nothing. "The dogs know." Blake gestured at Rex, still pressed against her leg. "Animals don't lie. They can't. Whatever you were, whatever you did, every dog at this facility recognizes you as pack. That doesn't happen by accident." "Sir," Commander Hayes stepped forward, "we conducted a background check. Her records are classified at level 5. I was told to stop asking questions." "You were told correctly." Blake's expression didn't change. "But that was before my best attack dog abandoned a demonstration to cuddle with the cleaning staff." He turned back to Ivory. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Who are you?" The moment stretched, expanded, became something clear and delicate. Then Derek Vance, impatient, embarrassed, determined to regain control of a situation that had gone wildly wrong, reached out and grabbed Ivory's jacket collar. "Answer the Admiral." He pulled. The fabric was old, worn, not designed to withstand the force of a man who spent his free time in the gym. It tore with a sound like ripping paper, revealing Ivory's left shoulder and the skin beneath. The tattoo covered her deltoid entirely, a detailed image of a 3-headed dog, each head facing a different direction. "Cerberus, guardian of the underworld," rendered in black ink with precise geometric lines. Beneath the image, letters and numbers, K9 Div, and surrounding the designation, 7 stars arranged in a partial circle. 7 stars, each one representing something. Someone. Master Sergeant Silas Turner was the first to react. The veteran handler had been standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the confrontation unfold with growing discomfort. Now his weathered face went pale. His hand trembled as it rose toward his forehead. Phantom. He breathed. Your Phantom. The name rippled through the assembled handlers like an earthquake. Whispers erupted. Phones appeared in hands, then disappeared just as quickly under the weight of military discipline. Gunnery Sergeant Logan Pierce stepped forward from the Pentagon delegation, his tablet forgotten, his Marine composure cracking at the edges. Operation Cerberus. You're the survivor, the only one who made it out of Kandahar. Admiral Blake hadn't moved. His eyes remained fixed on the tattoo, on the stars, on the woman who had spent 4 days cleaning kennels at a facility where her legend was taught in advanced handler courses. Master Chief Petty Officer Ivory Lawson, he said, his voice carrying the weight of confirmation. Call sign Phantom. DEVGRU K9 Division, inactive since recipient of the Navy Cross, Bronze Star with Valor and 3 Purple Hearts. He paused. I signed your classification papers myself 10 years ago. The training yard had gone silent. 50 handlers, support staff and Pentagon officials stood frozen in various stages of disbelief. Derek Vance still held the torn piece of jacket in his hand. His face had drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed without making a sound. Behind him, Lieutenant Amber Nash had pressed both hands over her mouth. Caleb Reeves had sunk to one knee, unable to support his own weight. Mason Briggs looked like he might be physically ill. Commander Hayes found his voice first. Master Chief, we had no idea. You weren't supposed to. Ivory's voice was quiet, but it reached every corner of the yard. That was the point. But why? Hayes spread his hands. Why would someone with your record, your clearance, your reputation, why would you come here to clean kennels? Ivory looked down at Rex. The Belgian Malinois hadn't moved from her side. His dark eyes gazed up at her with an expression that went beyond dog intelligence. Because these dogs, she said slowly, are the children and grandchildren of the team that died saving my life 8 years ago. 12 handlers went into Kandahar. 6 came out. Her hand dropped to rest on Rex's head. 12 dogs went in. None of them came back. The words hung in the air, heavy with meanings no one wanted to examine too closely. The breeding program, Silas Turner said, understanding dawning. We started it in 2016 using genetic material from the Cerberus casualties. Their sacrifice saved 12 SEALs who were trapped behind enemy lines. Ivory's fingers moved through Rex's fur with familiar gentleness. The dogs fought to the last breath, bought us time, took wounds that should have gone to their handlers. Her voice cracked slightly. I was the only human who walked out of that compound, and I carried pieces of 7 friends home in body bags. Admiral Blake removed his cover and held it against his chest. Around him, every service member present did the same. The 7 stars, Pierce said softly. Your team, my family. Ivory finally looked up, and for the first time since arriving at the facility, her eyes showed something other than calm neutrality. Pain lived there, old and deep, and never fully healed. I didn't come here for recognition. I came because this is the only place left where pieces of them still exist. The only place where I can still feel like they're not completely gone. She knelt beside Rex, bringing herself to his level. The Belgian Malinois whimpered and pressed closer, his powerful body radiating warmth against her side. They know, she whispered. Words meant for the dog, but audible to everyone. Somehow, across 8 years and 2 generations, they know who I am. They remember. Her voice broke completely. They remember, even when everyone else forgot. The silence that followed was not the awkward quiet of social discomfort. It was the respectful hush of people witnessing something sacred. Admiral Blake broke it by doing something no one expected. He saluted. The gesture was sharp, perfect, the result of decades of military discipline. His hand rose to his brow with the precision of a parade ground ceremony. Master Chief Petty Officer Lawson, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't try to hide it. On behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, it is my profound honor to stand in your presence. One by one, the other service members followed suit. Commander Hayes, Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, the colonels and captain from the Pentagon delegation, even the civilian analyst, though his version was clearly made up from half-remembered movies. Silas Turner held his salute longest, tears streaming openly down his weathered cheeks. The handlers who had tormented Ivory for 4 days stood apart from the formation. Derek Vance, Amber Nash, Caleb Reeves, Mason Briggs. They hadn't saluted, couldn't seem to remember how, their bodies frozen in states of shock and growing horror. The weight of what they'd done pressed down on them like a physical force. The broom thrown at her feet, the kennel locked with her inside, the public ridicule and private cruelty. They had harassed a legend, humiliated a hero, treated a woman who had lost everything serving her country as if she were less than human, and she had let that realization that Ivory had the knowledge, the authority, the connections to destroy their careers with a single phone call, and had chosen silence instead, was somehow the most crushing detail of all. Derek's knees buckled. He went down hard, combat boots scraping against concrete, his body refusing to support the weight of his shame. The torn piece of jacket slipped from his numb fingers. "Master Chief," he managed, his voice cracking like ice in spring. We didn't. Ivory rose smoothly, Rex moving with her like a shadow. "You didn't know. That doesn't excuse it." "No." She met his eyes, and in her gaze he saw not anger or contempt, but something worse, understanding. "It doesn't. But holding on to anger is a luxury I gave up in Kandahar. Too heavy to carry alongside everything else." She stepped past him, walking toward the kennel blocks where 49 other dogs waited. Rex trotted at her heel, his earlier aggression completely gone, replaced by the devoted attention of a dog who had found his purpose. Admiral Blake lowered his salute as she passed. "Master Chief." Ivory paused. "How long were you planning to stay?" "I hadn't decided." She didn't turn around, long enough to see them, to know they were healthy and well-trained, and carrying on what their ancestors started. And now, the question hung in the morning air around the training yard. 50 dogs had begun to make sounds, not barking but something softer, a sound that rippled from kennel to kennel like a message passed through generations. "Now," Ivory said quietly, "I suppose that depends on what happens next." She continued walking. The dogs' chorus followed her, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost like a welcome or a promise. Behind her, the Pentagon evaluation had been completely forgotten. Admiral Blake was already reaching for his secure phone, his mind racing through implications and possibilities that would require conversations at levels most people didn't know existed. Commander Hayes dismissed the remaining handlers with a gesture. They scattered in stunned silence, the morning's carefully planned demonstrations abandoned in favor of trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Only Silas Turner remained at the viewing stand, his salute finally lowered, his eyes still fixed on the small figure disappearing into Alpha Block. "Phantom," he murmured to himself, testing the name like a word in a foreign language. After all this time, the legend had returned, and something told him that the story was just beginning. The hours following the revelation rearranged themselves around Ivory's presence, like iron filings around a magnet. Word spread through the facility with the speed of wildfire, from handler to support staff to security to medical, until everyone who wore a uniform or carried a badge knew the truth about their cleaning contract. Master Chief Petty Officer Ivory Phantom Lawson, DEVGRU K9 Division, Operation Cerberus Survivor, the woman who had walked out of hell carrying 7 dog tags and an empty leash. Reactions varied by individual. Some handlers approached her with hesitant respect, offering awkward apologies for slights they had seen but not prevented. Others kept their distance, unsure how to interact with someone whose service record read like a classified action movie. The dogs had no such uncertainty. Wherever Ivory walked, dogs pressed against their kennel barriers with soft whimpers and wagging tails. The aggressive vocalizations that normally greeted strangers simply stopped. It was as if someone had flipped a switch in their shared awareness, replacing guard dog programming with something older and deeper. Pack recognition, family reunion. Silas Turner found her in Bravo Block around 2 p.m., sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor with 4 Belgian Malinois arranged around her like a protective detail. They weren't leashed, weren't commanded. They'd simply followed when she sat down and positioned themselves according to some internal rule no human had taught them. "May I?" Silas gestured at an empty space on the floor. Ivory nodded without looking up. They won't mind. They know you're not a threat. He lowered himself carefully, his joints complaining about a position his 53-year-old body was too old to comfortably keep. The nearest Malinois, a female named Storm, sniffed his hand once, then returned her attention to Ivory. I served with your predecessor, Silas said after a moment. Chief Masters, he was running the K9 program when I went through handler school in '94. Chief Masters trained me. Ivory's hand moved through fur in slow, careful strokes. He said I had a gift, that the dogs could sense something in me they couldn't explain. He called it the frequency. I remember him using that term, never understood what it meant. Neither did I at first. She finally looked at him, and Silas was struck by how young she still seemed despite everything in her file. Then I spent 18 months in the field with handlers who are dead now, and dogs who gave everything they had, and I understood. What did you understand? That it's not about commanding them, not about control or dominance, or any of the things we teach in basic course. Her voice dropped. It's about being willing to die for them the same way they're willing to die for you. They can sense that commitment, feel it somehow, and once they know you'll go all the way that you won't hesitate, won't flinch, won't ever put yourself above the pack, they'll follow you anywhere. Silas took this in silently. Around them the four Malinois had settled into various states of relaxation. Their breathing matched Ivory's in a way that seemed almost mechanical. Operation Cerberus, he said carefully. The file is still classified. Most of us only know the basics. The basics are enough. Are they? Ivory's hand stilled on Storm's side. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then, we were sent to extract a high-value target from a compound in Kandahar province. Intelligence said minimal opposition, standard snatch and grab. Intelligence was wrong. Intelligence is always wrong. No bitterness in her voice. Just a statement of fact. They had us pinned within the first 5 minutes. 3 handler teams down before we reached the primary building. The dogs they kept fighting even when their handlers fell. Bought us time we shouldn't have had. Silas had heard versions of this story before. The military was full of accounts of combat dogs protecting their handlers beyond all reason, beyond the natural self-preservation instinct that guides most living creature. The extraction team reached us around 4 a.m. Ivory continued. By then I was the only handler still breathing. The dogs, she swallowed. 11 of them formed a perimeter around the wounded seals we were protecting, held it for 6 hours against superior number. When the shooting finally stopped, they'd all. She didn't finish, didn't need to. You carried them out, Silas said softly. I carried what I could. Tags, collars, photos. Her hand found the pocket of her jacket, the same pocket Shadow had alerted on days early. Small things. Things that proved they existed, that they mattered. They mattered. Tell that to the families who never got closure. Tell that to the programs that got shut down because someone decided K9 operations were too expensive, too complicated, too much. The sharpness in her voice was the first real emotion Silas had heard from her in 4 days. Tell that to the handlers who came after us and got pulled from the field, because bureaucrats couldn't justify the budget. Is that why you disappeared? After Cerberus, I didn't disappear. Ivory rose smoothly, the dogs mirroring her movement. I stepped back, took the medical discharge they offered, let them classify my file, and pretend I didn't exist. But you came here. I came here because they built a breeding program from the genetic material of my team. She turned to face him fully. Storm's grandmother was a dog named Valkyrie. Valkyrie died covering my retreat through a breach in the compound wall. She took wounds that should have killed her instantly, but kept fighting for another 3 minutes. 3 minutes that saved 4 lives. Storm pressed against Ivory's leg, ears perked forward. Now Valkyrie's granddaughter is standing here, and she knows. Ivory's voice dropped to a whisper. Somehow, across genetics and generations and 8 years of military breeding programs, she knows who I am, and what her family did for mine. Silas found he had no adequate words to respond. I'm not here for recognition, Ivory continued, her tone returning to normal. I'm not here to reclaim glory, or prove anything to anyone. I came because these dogs are the only family I have left, and I wanted to make sure someone was taking proper care of them. And are we taking proper care? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been.
You're training them to be weapons, Ivory said finally. That's the job. That's what they're bred for. But weapons break, Silas. They wear down. They need maintenance and care and someone who sees them as more than tools. Is that what you saw here? Tools. I saw handlers who'd forgotten, or never learned, that these animals would die for them without hesitation. I saw a culture of dominance instead of partnership. She paused. And I saw a few people who understood. You, Fern, the Admiral. The Admiral knew who you were. A hint of something that might have been a smile crossed her face. Solomon Blake was a captain when I went through advanced training. He signed off on my field certification. We haven't spoken in years, but some things you don't forget. Before Silas could respond, a commotion erupted near the main gate. Radio chatter spiked. Dogs throughout the facility began barking in ways that suggested alarm rather than excitement. Ivory's posture shifted instantly. The relaxation of moments ago, replaced by coiled alertness that transformed her entire being. What is it? Silas asked, scrambling to his feet. Perimeter alert. Her head tilted, processing sounds no ordinary person would have noticed. Eastern fence. Same section as 2 nights ago. That was a sensor malfunction. Was it? She was moving before he could answer. Storm and the other 3 Malinois falling into formation around her like a military escort. The dogs hadn't been commanded, hadn't been signaled. They simply knew what she needed and provided. Silas followed, his mind racing through tactical possibilities, while his instincts screamed that something was very, very wrong. The eastern perimeter revealed nothing obvious. Security personnel swept the fence line with flashlights, while handlers restrained dogs straining at their leashes. Whatever had triggered the sensors was either gone or never physically present. Admiral Blake had joined Commander Hayes at the Mobile command post, their expressions grim in the floodlight glare. Second incident in 4 days, Blake was saying as Ivory approached. Same section of fence, same lack of evidence. Could be wildlife, Hayes offered. Deer have been known to. Deer don't trigger thermal sensors without leaving a heat signature. Blake turned as Ivory entered the command area. Master Chief, your assessment. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the fence line, Storm padding silently at her heel. Her eyes tracked the darkness beyond the perimeter lights, searching for something the others couldn't see. The dogs knew, she said finally. Both times they went quiet before the alarms triggered. Quiet how? Alert silence, pack behavior. They were tracking something. Tracking what? Ivory's hand found her jacket pocket, the challenge coin inside pressed against her palm. I don't know. She turned back to face the Admiral, but I'd suggest increasing patrols and implementing handler teams on the eastern approach. Whatever's out there, it's not wildlife. Blake studied her for a long moment. You think it's connected to you? I think I've learned not to believe in coincidences. The Admiral nodded slowly. Commander Hayes, implement the Master Chief's suggestions. I want this perimeter locked down until we understand what we're dealing with. Yes. As the security team scrambled to comply, Ivory remained at the fence line, her silhouette stark against the floodlights. Storm pressed against her leg, the Malinois's attention fixed on the same darkness her handler studied. What are you looking at? Silas asked softly, joining her at the barrier. Ghosts, Ivory murmured. Or maybe something worse than ghosts. She didn't answer, but her hand never left that pocket, fingers wrapped around a coin that carried secrets she hadn't shared with anyone in 8 long years. Secrets that, if the eastern perimeter breach meant what she suspected, might not stay buried much longer. The night refused to yield its secret. Security teams swept the eastern perimeter until 3 a.m., finding nothing but shadows and the restless stirring of 50 dogs who sensed what their human counterparts could not detect. Ivory didn't sleep. She spent those dark hours walking the kennel blocks, Storm trailing behind her like a 4-legged shadow. Each dog she passed received a moment of attention, a touch, a word, a silent acknowledgement that went beyond the barrier of species. By the time dawn painted the Virginia coast in shades of pink and gold, something had shifted in the facility's atmosphere. The handlers who arrived for morning duty moved differently, spoke differently, looked at the cleaning contractor with new eyes that held equal parts respect and shame. Derek Vance found her in Alpha Block at 6:30 a.m. He stood at the entrance for a full minute before she noticed him, Her attention focused on Rex's coat as she brushed matted fur with practiced strokes. Master Chief. The title felt strange in his mouth, wrong somehow for a woman he'd thrown a broom at 4 days earlier. Chief Vance. She didn't look up. I too. He stopped. Started again. What I did, what we all did. There's no excuse. No, there is. The blunt agreement hit harder than any scolding. Derek had prepared himself for anger, for accusations, for the justified fury of a superior officer who'd been disrespected in ways that should end careers. This quiet acceptance was infinitely worse. I've submitted my resignation, he said. Commander Hayes has it on his desk. The brushing stopped. Ivory turned, and for the first time since his arrival, she looked directly at him. Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered in the depths of her eyes. Why? Because I failed. His voice cracked on the word. Not just you, everyone. The program, everything Chief Masters built and everything you sacrificed to protect. He swallowed hard. I became exactly the kind of handler I swore I'd never be.
Arrogant, dismissive, so convinced of my own importance that I couldn't see what was standing right in front of me. And resignation fixes that. It's accountability. No. Ivory set down the brush and rose to face him fully. Resignation is escape. It's walking away from the mess you made instead of cleaning it up. Derek's jaw tightened. With respect, Master Chief, I don't see how. You're a good handler. The words stopped him cold. Your technique is solid. Your dogs respond well. You understand the fundamentals better than half the instructors I worked with in DEVGRU. Then why? Because somewhere along the way you forgot that being skilled doesn't make you superior. You started seeing yourself as the master instead of the partner. She stepped closer, her small frame somehow commanding the space between them. That's not a fatal flaw, Chief. That's a lesson you haven't learned yet. How do I learn it? By staying. By doing the work. By remembering every single time you look at a new recruit or a civilian contractor that you have no idea what they've survived to stand in front of you. The silence stretched between them like a bridge being built one plank at a time. My resignation, Derek said finally. You want me to withdraw it? I want you to earn the right to keep wearing that uniform. That means facing what you did, not running from it. He nodded slowly, the motion carrying the weight of a promise. Yes, Master Chief. And Derek. She waited until his eyes met hers. The next time you see someone you think is beneath you, remember this moment. Remember how wrong you were about me. Then ask yourself what else you might be wrong about. She returned to Rex. The conversation apparently over. Derek stood frozen for several heartbeats, processing the unexpected mercy he had been given. Then he turned and walked toward Commander Hayes' office to retrieve his resignation letter. The morning brought consequences that rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Lieutenant Amber Nash requested a transfer to administrative duties. Unable to meet the eyes of handlers who'd witnessed her treatment of Ivory, her request was denied pending a formal review of her conduct. Petty Officer First Class Caleb Reeves approached Ivory during the mid-morning break, his earlier arrogance completely gone. He didn't speak, couldn't seem to find words good enough for the task, but he knelt beside her as she examined a young Malinois's teeth and simply observed, learning, absorbing, beginning the long process of unlearning everything he'd assumed about dominance and control. Mason Briggs was the hardest case. He found Ivory alone in the equipment shed around 11 a.m., his face a mask of mixed emotions. The memory of locking her in Titan's kennel sat between them like a physical presence. I could have killed you. His voice was barely audible. That first day when I locked the door if Titan had attacked, he wouldn't have. You didn't know that. Yes, Ivory sorted through a box of training equipment, her movements unhurried. I did. How? How could you possibly? Because I've spent more time with military working dogs than I've spent with humans. She pulled out a worn leather leash and examined it. I know their body language, their warning signs, their tells. Titan wasn't aggressive in that kennel. He was afraid. Afraid of what? Of himself. Of what he might do if someone pushed him too far. She met Mason's eyes. Sound familiar? The young petty officer flinched as if hit. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, Ivory continued. What you did was cruel and potentially lethal. You used your position to terrorize someone you saw as defenseless. I know, but I'm also not going to destroy your career over it. She set down the leash. You remind me of someone I knew once. Same chip on the shoulder. Same need to prove himself by pushing others down. Who? Me. 20 years ago. The admission seemed to cost her something. I was angry and scared and convinced that the only way to survive was to make sure everyone else knew their place beneath me. What changed? I met the dogs. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. They don't care about rank or showing off or who has more ribbons on their chest. They respond to honesty, to the person underneath all the armor we build. Mason was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to be that person. Then learn. That's what this program is supposed to teach. She picked up her equipment and moved toward the door. Start by apologizing to Fern Cooper. She was terrified when she found me in that kennel. She thought she was going to witness a mauling. She saved you. She tried to. That matters more than you might think. Ivory left him standing in the equipment shed, the weight of his choices pressing down on shoulders that seemed suddenly too narrow to carry them. Admiral Blake remained at the facility through the morning, holding meetings not listed on any official schedule. By noon, he'd gathered a group in Commander Hayes' conference room that included Ivory, Silas Turner, Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, and Chief Warrant Officer Ezra Dalton. What I'm about to discuss doesn't leave this room. Blake's tone carried the seriousness of classification levels most people never encountered. Is that understood? Nods around the table. Master Chief Lawson's presence here isn't accidental. The Admiral pulled a folder from his briefcase. Real paper, Ivory noted, not digital files that could be hacked or traced. 3 months ago, we received intelligence suggesting that details of Operation Cerberus had been compromised. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Compromised how? Hayes asked. Names, locations, tactical details that were never supposed to exist outside of secure facilities. Blake opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents covered in blacked-out sections. Someone has been selling information about our K9 operations to foreign powers, not just Cerberus. Multiple missions spanning the last decade. The perimeter breaches, Ivory said quietly. We believe they're connected. Blake nodded. This facility houses the descendants of the Cerberus dogs. More importantly, it houses the breeding records and genetic databases that make our K9 program unique. That information in the wrong hands could compromise years of operational security. You think someone is trying to access the facility? I think someone already has. The Admiral's eyes found Ivory's. The first breach occurred 2 days after you arrived, the second 4 days later. Either that's coincidence, or someone is very interested in your presence here. Silas leaned forward. Master Chief, do you have any idea who might be targeting you specifically? Ivory's hand found her jacket pocket. The challenge coin inside had never felt heavier. The 7 stars on my tattoo, she said slowly. 6 of them represent handlers who died at Cerberus, but there were 7 of us on that mission. 7 handlers. Pierce checked his tablet. The official record shows 6 casualties. Ivory withdrew the coin from her pocket and placed it on the table. The design was visible now. The same 3-headed dog as her tattoo, surrounded by text too small to read from a distance. This belonged to the 7th handler. Call sign Echo. Echo survived Cerberus. Echo was reported killed during the initial breach. Body never recovered. We assumed. She paused. I assumed he died with the others. The extraction team found dog tags, but no remains. You think Echo is alive? I think someone wants me to believe Echo is alive. Ivory pushed the coin toward the center of the table. I found this in my apartment 3 months ago. No note, no explanation. Just the coin placed on my pillow while I was sleeping. Admiral Blake picked up the coin, examining it with narrowed eyes. This is authentic. These were only issued to handlers who completed DEVGRU K9 advanced training. Echo completed training 6 months before I did. He was the best handler I ever worked with. If he survived Cerberus, Ivory shook her head. If he survived and never contacted anyone in 8 years, there's a reason. And that reason probably isn't good. You came here because you thought he might make contact. I came here because this facility is the only connection left to what happened in Kandahar. If Echo is alive, if he's been compromised or turned or simply lost, this is where he'd eventually appear. The implication settled over the room like a shroud. So we have a potential asset or threat with intimate knowledge of our most sensitive K9 operations, possibly working with foreign actors, and definitely monitoring this facility. Hayes rubbed his temples. Wonderful. What do you need from us, Master Chief? Blake asked. Time and access. Ivory retrieved the coin, returning it to her pocket. If Echo is out there, he'll make contact eventually. When he does, I want to be ready. And if he's hostile, then I'll deal with it. Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had faced worse odds and survived. He was my teammate, my friend. Whatever he's become, I owe him the chance to explain before anyone else gets involved. Blake studied her for a long moment, weighing risks and protocols and decades of military experience against the simple human aspect of the request. You have 48 hours, he said finally. After that, this becomes an official investigation with all the complications that entails. Understood, sir. And Master Chief, the Admiral's expression softened slightly. Whatever happens, you're not alone in this. Not anymore. Ivory nodded, but her eyes had already drifted toward the window, toward the eastern perimeter, toward shadows that might conceal ghosts or enemies or something in between. The afternoon passed quickly, hiding the tension humming beneath the facility's surface. Handlers put their dogs through extended drills. Security personnel conducted more sweeps, and Ivory Lawson walked the kennel blocks with 50 pairs of eyes tracking her every movement. Fern Cooper caught up with her near Charlie Block, slightly out of breath from jogging across the compound. I heard about what happened this morning with Vance and the others. Ivory continued walking. News travels fast. It's a small facility. Fern fell into step beside her. People are saying you convinced Derek to stay, that you're not pressing charges against Mason, that you've been forgiven. Forgiveness is a strong word. What would you call it? Ivory stopped beside a kennel housing a young German shepherd named Apollo. The dog pressed against the barrier, tail wagging, eyes bright with recognition. I'd call it perspective. She knelt to scratch Apollo's ears through the chain link. 8 years ago, I watched 6 friends die in my arms. I carried their bodies to a helicopter that shouldn't have reached us in time. I spent 18 months in rehabilitation, learning to walk again after the wounds I took. Fern was silent, waiting. During that time, I had a lot of chances to be angry, to blame the intelligence officers who gave us bad information, to blame the command structure that put us in an impossible position, to blame myself for surviving when better people didn't. Ivory's voice remained steady, but something in her posture had shifted. I chose not to. Why? Because anger is heavy, and I was already carrying enough. She stood, giving Apollo one final pat. The people who hurt me this week, Derek, Amber, Caleb, Mason, they're not villains. They're humans who made mistakes. The same kind of mistakes I've made. The same kind everyone makes when they forget that the world is full of stories they'll never know. That's very philosophical. That's very practical. A genuine smile flickered across Ivory's face. Carrying grudges takes energy. I'd rather spend that energy on things that matter. Like the dogs, like the handlers who want to learn, like making sure that the next generation of K9 teams doesn't repeat the mistakes that got my team killed. Fern took this in silently. Then, Commander Hayes mentioned you've been offered a position here, official consultant to the training program. He mentioned it. Are you going to take it? Ivory's gaze swept across the kennel blocks, taking in the rows of dogs and handlers, and the entire system of training and discipline that represented Naval Special Warfare's K9 program. I haven't decided yet. There's something I need to resolve first. Before Fern could ask what that something was, the facility's alarm system erupted into screaming life. Not the perimeter alert from previous nights. This was the full facility lockdown. 3 long blasts followed by a continuous tone, signaling an active threat on the grounds. Ivory was moving before the first alarm cycle completed. The chaos that followed would later be pieced together from security footage, handler reports, and the confused accounts of personnel who couldn't quite explain what they'd seen. At 5:42 p.m., an unknown person breached the eastern fence line. Unlike previous incidents, this breach was clear. A clean cut through the chain link, professional grade, made with tools not found in civilian markets. Security responded within 90 seconds, converging on the breach point with weapons drawn. They found nothing. The intruder had vanished into the facility's interior, moving with a speed and skill that suggested extensive training. Commander Hayes coordinated from the operations center, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. I want handler teams on every block. Lock down the kennels. Nobody in or out until we've swept the entire facility. Sir, the dogs are going crazy. Derek Vance's voice crackled over the radio. They're not responding to commands. What do you mean not responding? I mean they're ignoring everything. All of them. They're focused on something else. Hayes pulled up the kennel camera feeds and felt his blood run cold. 50 military working dogs stood at attention in their individual enclosures. Not barking, not pacing, standing perfectly still, every head oriented in the same direction, toward Alpha Block. Toward Ivory Lawson, who stood alone in the center of the compound, with her arms at her sides and her eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the floodlights. Master Chief, Hayes's voice carried through the facility's PA system. Get to the bunker now. She didn't move. Master Chief Lawson, that is a direct order. We have an active threat on. Her voice was calm, impossibly calm given the circumstances. He's here. Who's here? The shadows at the edge of the floodlit zone shifted, came together, became a figure that stepped into the light with the calm confidence of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The man was perhaps 40 years old, thin and weathered in ways that suggested decades of hard living.
He wore civilian clothes, dark jacket, cargo pants, boots that looked like military surplus. His face was partially hidden by a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months, but his eyes were unmistakable. "Hello, Phantom." His voice carried across the compound, rough with disuse. "It's been a while." Echo. The name emerged from Ivory's lips like a prayer, like a curse. "You're supposed to be dead." "I've been a lot of things." He moved closer, his walk showing the slight limp of someone carrying old injuries. "Dead, missing, forgotten. Seems like you're the only one who remembers the truth." "What is the truth?" "That I didn't die in Kandahar. That I've spent 8 years trying to find out who sold us to the enemy, who gave our positions to the people who killed our team." His hands remained visible, palms forward, a gesture of non-aggression that Ivory recognized from countless tactical scenarios. "And I found them." "Who?" Echo's smile was bitter. "That's what I came to tell you." Commander Hayes's voice boomed through the PA system. "Unidentified individual. Get on the ground with your hands visible. Security teams prepare to engage." "No." Ivory's command cut through the chaos. "Stand down. Master Chief, he breached our perimeter. He's one of us." She turned to face the operations center. Her small frame somehow commanded attention from every person at the facility. "He's one of ours, and I'm taking responsibility for whatever happens next." The standoff lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Security personnel with weapons aimed at the intruder, Ivory standing between them like a human shield, Echo frozen in the floodlights with that bitter smile still twisting his lips.
Admiral Blake's voice came over the radio, calm and authoritative. "Security teams, lower your weapons. Let the Master Chief handle this." The tension didn't vanish. It changed. Weapons lowered but remained ready. Personnel held their positions but watched with a new level of attention. "You owe me an explanation." Ivory faced Echo fully. 8 years of silence. 8 years of thinking you died in my arms. Do you have any idea what that did to me? "I know exactly what it did." His voice cracked. "I watched from a distance. I saw you go through rehab, saw you take the discharge, saw you disappear into civilian life, and try to forget everything we were. Then why? Why didn't you reach out? Because the people who betrayed us were still active. Because reaching out would have put you in danger. Because—" He stopped, and for the first time since emerging from the shadows, emotion broke through his carefully maintained composure. "Because I was ashamed." Ashamed of what? Of surviving. Of running when I should have stayed and fought. Of leaving you to carry bodies that should have included mine. The words hung in the night air, heavy with 8 years of guilt and grief. "I didn't run." Echo's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I was captured, held for 3 days before I escaped. By the time I got back to friendly lines, the extraction was complete, and you were in surgery, fighting for your life. Why didn't you report in?" "Because I'd seen things, heard things. The people who ambushed us knew our positions, our timing, our extraction routes. They knew because someone told them." "Who?" Echo shook his head. "Not here. Not like this. I have documentation, years of evidence, but the people involved are powerful, connected. If I reveal what I know in the wrong circumstances, then we go somewhere safe." Ivory took a step toward him. "Come inside. Let Admiral Blake hear what you have. Let the system work. The system is compromised." His voice hardened. "Don't you understand? I've spent 8 years proving that. The leak goes higher than anyone wants to believe. Then we burn it down together, the way we should have from the beginning. Brother and sister in arms, separated by years and lies, finally standing close enough to touch." The compound held its breath, waiting for an outcome that seemed impossible. Echo's resistance crumbled in stages. First the tension in his shoulders, then the defensive set of his jaw, finally the wall behind his eyes that had protected him through 8 years of lonely investigation. "You always were the stubborn one," he said quietly. "Someone had to be." A sound interrupted them, not human, but canine. A whimper that started in Alpha Block and spread kennel by kennel until 50 dogs were vocalizing in unison. Not barking, not aggressive, something more primal, recognition. "They know you." Ivory glanced toward the kennel blocks, the same way they knew me. "Their ancestors saved my life, too." Echo's voice was thick. "In Kandahar, after I was captured. When I escaped, it was one of our dogs who found me in the desert and led me to safety." "Which one?" "Reaper." For the name was a reverent whisper. "He was wounded, but still moving, still fighting. He stayed with me for 2 days until I reached friendly territory. Died in my arms half a mile from the extraction point." Ivory's eyes went to Rex's kennel, where the Belgian Malinois stood pressed against the barrier, his dark eyes fixed on Echo with an intensity that went beyond ordinary dog awareness. "Rex is Reaper's grandson," she said. "Second generation, same bloodline." Echo followed her gaze, and something in his expression shattered. "He looks just like him. They all do, in different ways, different combinations, but the bloodline is there. The memory. Is that why you came here, to see what was left of them?" "I came here because I was tired of being alone, tired of pretending that part of my life didn't exist." Ivory reached out and took his hand, the first physical contact they'd had in 8 years. "I came because family is supposed to be together." Echo gripped her hand like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. The moment was interrupted by Admiral Blake approaching with Commander Hayes at his side. Security personnel maintained their positions, but their weapons were holstered. The immediate crisis apparently resolved. "Master Chief," Blake's voice carried professional courtesy with an undertone of genuine concern. "I assume you can explain what's happening here." "Admiral, this is Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, call sign Echo, K9 Division, same team as me." Ivory didn't release Echo's hand. He survived Kandahar and has spent the last 8 years investigating the intelligence leak that compromised our mission. Webb was declared killed in action. Webb was declared a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. Blake studied the newcomer with eyes that had evaluated threats for 4 decades. "Chief Webb, you breached a secure military facility. You've been operating outside the chain of command for 8 years. You have approximately 60 seconds to convince me you're not an enemy combatant." Echo met the Admiral's gaze without flinching. "Sir, I have documentation proving that our mission in Kandahar was deliberately compromised by someone within DEVGRU command structure. Names, dates, financial transactions, communications intercepts, everything you need to identify and prosecute the people responsible for killing my team. And you couldn't bring this through proper channels? With respect, sir, the proper channels are compromised. That's the whole point." Blake was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Hayes. "Commander, have your people stand down. Chief Webb will be taken to the secure briefing room for debriefing. Master Chief Lawson, you'll accompany him." "Yes, sir." "And Webb?" The Admiral's voice hardened. "If I find out you're lying, if any of this is fabrication or misdirection, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in a cell so deep they'll have to pump sunlight to you. Are we clear?" "Crystal, sir." The procession that formed Admiral, Commander, 2 veterans of a mission that had never officially happened, surrounded by security personnel whose confusion was clear in every step, made its way toward the administration building. Behind them, 50 dogs finally broke their silence. Not barking, not howling, something that could only be described as singing, a harmonic vocalization that rose from every kennel simultaneously and filled the night air with a sound that seemed almost otherworldly. They sang as the handlers who'd almost ruined their connection walked past. They sang for the reunion they'd somehow known was coming. They sang for family, the pact that death and distance and 8 years of separation had failed to break. The debriefing lasted through the night and into the following morning. Echo's documentation was everything he'd promised and more, a meticulously assembled case that implicated figures whose names made Admiral Blake's face go pale with recognition. By 8 a.m., secure calls were being made to offices in Washington that didn't appear on any organizational chart. By noon, investigators were en route. By evening, the first arrests would be made in what would eventually become the largest internal security breach in DEVGRU history. But that was politics. That was justice. That was the system finally working the way it was supposed to. What mattered more, what Ivory would remember long after the investigations concluded and the perpetrators faced trial, was the moment in the kennel block at dawn. Echo knelt beside Rex's enclosure, his hand pressed against the chain link as the Belgian Malinois pressed back from the other side. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. The conversation happening between man and dog went beyond words. "He knows you," Ivory said softly. "He knows what I was." Echo's voice was rough with emotion. "What we all were, what his family died protecting. The breeding program was designed to preserve their genetics, their capabilities. No one expected it would preserve this. Maybe that's the part that matters most." Echo looked up at her, the part that can't be quantified or measured or put into training manuals. The connection. Ivory nodded slowly. "Commander Hayes offered me a position here," she said. "Official consultant, rebuilding the handler training program from the ground up. Are you going to take it?" "I think I have to." She looked out over the kennel blocks at the 50 dogs who'd known her on sight, who'd protected her with their silence, who'd sung when Echo emerged from the darkness. They need someone who understands what they're carrying. Someone who can teach the handlers that these aren't weapons. They're partners, family, their legacy, Echo added,
Everything we built, everything we lost, everything that survived because these animals refused to let it die. Will you stay? Help me." The question hung between them, weighted with 8 years of separation and the complicated dance of reconnection. "I don't know if I can," Echo's voice was honest. "I've spent so long running, investigating, surviving. I don't know if I remember how to stay." "Then learn." Ivory echoed the words she'd spoken to Derek Vance the morning before. "That's what this program is supposed to teach." Echo was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, a genuine smile broke through the weathered exhaustion of his face. "You always were the stubborn one. Someone had to be. If this story moved you, I have a favor to ask. Share it with someone who appreciates military heroes and the bonds they form with their canine partners. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that bell so you never miss stories like this. The video on screen right now features another incredible military story I think you'll love. Thank you for staying until the end. You're the reason this channel exists." 3 weeks passed. The investigations ended with convictions that would remain classified for decades. Admiral Blake received a commendation he couldn't talk about. Commander Hayes was promoted to a position that officially didn't exist, and the Naval Special Warfare K9 training facility in Virginia Beach quietly became something more than it had been. The new curriculum bore Ivory's fingerprints on every page. Handler training now included sections on pack psychology, non-dominance leadership, and the ethical responsibilities of partnering with animals who would die for you without hesitation. The phrase, "They're not tools, they're teammates," became something close to a facility motto. Derek Vance completed his retraining and returned to handler duties with a humility his former self wouldn't have recognized. Amber Nash transferred out, unable to face the daily reminder of her failures. Caleb Reeves became one of Ivory's most dedicated students, his technical, challenging attitude redirected toward constructive improvement. Mason Briggs apologized to every person he'd wronged and started volunteering at the facility's veterinary clinic on his off hours. Silas Turner retired with full honors, passing his responsibilities to a new generation of handlers who'd been taught by a legend they had almost overlooked. Echo remained, not officially. His status was too complicated for standard personnel files, but as a shadowy presence who appeared during training exercises and vanished between debriefings. His relationship with Ivory rebuilt itself one conversation at a time. Two survivors learning to be family again after years of thinking the other was gone forever. And the dogs, the 50 military working dogs who'd known both handlers on site, continued to show behaviors that defied normal explanation. Rex followed Ivory through the facility like a personal bodyguard. Storm attached herself to Echo with equal devotion. The others distributed their attention according to some internal logic that no trainer could predict or control. They were pack. They were legacy. They were proof that some bonds went beyond genetics and training and the cold calculations of military breeding programs. On the evening of Ivory's third week as official consultant, she stood alone in Alpha Block, watching the sun set over the Virginia coast. The day's training had gone well, handlers responding to new techniques, dogs performing above expectations, the entire program slowly changing into something that honored its origins. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The message was from an unknown number. No caller ID, no identifying information, just 4 words, "The 8th star waits." Ivory stared at the screen, her pulse quickening despite years of training that should have kept it steady. 7 stars on her tattoo, 6 handlers dead. Echo survived. Who was the 8th? Her fingers moved automatically, typing a response she'd never expected to send. "Who is this?" The reply came immediately. "You know who. Kandahar wasn't the end. It was the beginning. More soon." Then silence. Ivory pocketed the phone and turned to face the kennel blocks. Rex was watching her through the chain link, his dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. "What do you know, boy?" she murmured. "What else is out there?" Rex whimpered softly and pressed against the barrier. In the distance, Echo emerged from the administration building, his silhouette familiar and strange at the same time. He raised a hand in greeting, unaware of the message that had just arrived, unaware that the mission they thought was finished might have only begun. Ivory raised her hand in return. Whatever came next, whatever secret still lurked in the shadows of their shared past, she wouldn't face it alone. She had Echo. She had the handlers who'd learned to see beyond their assumptions. She had 50 dogs whose ancestors had died protecting her, and whose descendants would do the same without hesitation. She had family, and family, as she'd learned in a compound in Kandahar 8 years ago, was worth any sacrifice. The sun dipped below the horizon. The facility's lights flickered to life, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, a truth waited to be uncovered, one that would change everything again. Rex howled once, a long mournful note that echoed across the compound, and was answered by 49 other voices in perfect harmony. They knew something was coming. They always did, and when it arrived they would be ready together. This story carries a powerful message that reaches far beyond the military setting. Ivory Lawson walked into that facility as a cleaning lady, endured mockery and humiliation, yet never once demanded recognition or respect. She let her actions speak louder than any medal or rank ever could. The first lesson is simple but profound. Never judge anyone by their appearance or position. The person cleaning your floors might have sacrificed more than you can imagine. The quiet colleague in the corner office might carry invisible wounds. Every human being has a story worth hearing, if we take the time to listen. The second lesson speaks to the nature of true leadership. Ivory had every right to destroy the careers of those who mistreated her. Instead, she chose to teach. She transformed enemies into students and shame into growth. That is the mark of genuine strength. Not the power to punish, but the wisdom to rebuild. The third lesson is about loyalty that goes beyond time and distance. 50 dogs recognized Ivory not because of training, but because of something deeper, a bond passed down through generations. Family is not always blood. Sometimes family is forged in fire and preserved through love. If this story moved you, carry its message forward. Look at the people around you with fresh eyes. Treat everyone with dignity regardless of their title. And remember that the quietest person in the room might just be the strongest warrior you will ever meet. Subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.